But
Yeah.
anyway, we're finishing up Rule 12, and it reads, the web pulsates, it contracts and expands. Let the magician seize a midway point and thus release the prisoner of the planet whose note is right and justly tuned to that which must be made. And in this rule, we have covered interludes and cycles and the prisoners of the planet. The prisoners of the planet, just to recap here, are lives and monads which have been projected into form, and matter and form actually produce a prison. But what's interesting about this prison that all life came into is we volunteered for it. Now, visualize ourselves in our spiritual essence before we descended. You had pretty much power to do whatever you wanted. You were in a state of bliss. There was no negativity. Everything was cool. You could go anywhere in the universe you wanted. You could visualize anything you want. You had no needs. Why in the world would you come down to a place like Earth where there's risk, there's suffering, there's limitations? Why would we choose that? What do you think?
Adventure.
World
Yeah. Now think.
to become better.
Yeah. So, in other words, you know, if you have it really good, if everything's just going completely the way that you will it, wouldn't you get bored after a while?
Very bored.
Yeah. So the life of God, even though it's in a state of peace and bliss and power and all these things, has everything it wants, except for one thing. It wants some adventure. To get adventure, it takes limitation. And I always compare it to a game. If you make a game, what's the main thing that makes a game interesting? It's the rules of the game.
The rules
Okay, every game has a set of rules, and if it has an interesting set of rules with limitations, it's always limitations. It says you can do this, you can't do this, and you have to learn what the rules are. And once you really learn the rules and master the rules, then you get good at the game, and the game becomes very interesting. But then what happens when you played the game over and over for a whole bunch of different times? Then even the game becomes boring, doesn't it?
You want a new game.
Right. Then you want a new game. So we come here down here to Earth. We incarnate over and over and over and over and over, and then pretty soon that even becomes boring because eventually we become a master. Then we become like Christ, and then we become a master of this sphere. And then what happens? Then we go back to our essence, and when we go back to our essence, we have an increase in satisfaction and increase in um, our what makes us a living entity, and an increase in joy because we've come down here, we've mastered it. Like Boise State here, we just had a major game yesterday and we won, and everybody in Boise is really happy. We had the game, we won it, and where we may be on to the Cotton Bowl or something everybody's hoping for here. So anyway, it's great to come down and actually win the game. Now, if you don't win the game, fine, then there's always the next game. Okay, there's always the next season, the next year, and eventually we have a great season, a good enough season down here that we master it, and we were able to go back to our source and have a much greater feeling of satisfaction than we had before. But then after we're back there with our source for a long period of time, and time is a strange word to use because it's in a state of kind of timelessness. But eventually then what do we want? We want to try it out again. But different rules this time, different. It's like you play Monopoly for a while, and now we're tired of Monopoly, so let's play another game. And so there's an infinite number of games out there that are designed for us, or that we design ourselves. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
there was an explanation by, I think, Reverend Seymour that we were like angels before we incarnate the first time, and we decide, or any angel decides, well, I want to be more than just an angel, because angels know only good, and so they work under God's domain. So when an angel decides they want to become better than an angel and become more godlike, they have to take on the role of incarnation.
Yeah.
They have to
Yeah.
come into the body and experience the good and the bad. They can never progress past being an angel. And so once we get indoctrinated into the physical, we'll reincarnate until we follow the path out of here. But it's that kind of a game, is that if you want to be better than an angel, you want to be more godlike, you got to take on the physical and learn the duality of it.
Yeah, the DK tells us that every life in the universe has to pass through the human stage one time or another. We're kind of the midway point of the universe. I call us the soul of the universe, because the soul of your body is like energy sent from your higher self that connects spirit and matter. It's a connecting point. And for the universe itself, humanity, human type lives are the connecting point of spirit and matter. We're the life forms that kind of link the two worlds together. And so all lives have to pass through the human kingdom. And he says that every atom in the planet will eventually pass through a human body, which is interesting statement. I mean, there's a lot of matter on the earth, but we have many millions and billions of years for that to transpire before everything is wrapped up. They say that the life of the entire universe, according to the ancient wisdom, lasts for 310 trillion years. That's you know how long a trillion is? 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. So that's a very long length of time, if that is accurate. Now, yeah.
One thing to remember, the growth comes from resistance. And the way we have resistance is when we enter into matter.
Right, and the limitations. So we were all of us here were crazy enough to leave our blissful state and come down here and risk ill health, accidents, attacks, negative people, suffering, also have the possibility of great joy for overcoming all these things. And so we were crazy enough to come down here, and there were also certain entities that think it's so crazy that they don't even want to do it. So there's those entities that exist in the higher spheres also. But we were the brave ones. We decided to come down here, and we limited ourselves on purpose so that we could have this great challenge and grow in light and love and power by overcoming these things. And DK here points out three things that are underlying the what he calls the law of evolution. He says, first of all, is the principle of limitation. So we limit ourselves, like I say, by undergoing an incarnation where we have all these rules, but we don't know the rules when we come down here. We got to find out. It's like playing Monopoly, but you're not sure of all the rules. The first thing is to learn what all the rules are. So we come down here, we limit ourselves. And then he says the second principle involved in liberation is periodic manifestation. In other words, we just don't come down here once, but and just like if you're playing a good game, you just don't play it once. You play it several times, and every time you play it, you get a little bit better at it. So we come down here and we play the game once and twice and 3 times and many times. So this periodical manifestation is part of the plan for us to evolve and become masters. And third, he says the principle of expansion. In other words, all of us as intelligences and individual lives are capable of expanding our livingness and our capacities. But to expand, we have to suffer the limitation and have periodical manifestation. Okay, so these principles, he says, leads to a more complicated prison, but then finally to liberation. And one thing he points out that is contrary to a lot of different thinking is that death itself, he says, is a liberation. He says death is not a prison. Death is part of the plan to be able to escape from prison. So, see here, let me put somebody on. So death is part of the plan to be able to escape from prison. But it's something that, it's the thing that everybody fears the most is death, and they see that as something the opposite, but it's actually a principle that brings greater freedom in the long run. Because, and he points out that we often try to extend life beyond what it should be extended. That often when a person gets ill or whatever, and we extend that life, the guy is in such a discomfort that he doesn't really accomplish anything during the couple years of misery that his life may be extended by our scientific knowledge that we have today. He says in many cases, it's maybe time to go, and we will eventually develop the ability to just recognize our time. And when we recognize our time, we will just release ourselves. Or he says even have a party, going away party, and then release ourselves and go move on to the next step. He says each kingdom in nature acts in 2 ways. One, he says, as a liberator of the kingdom below it. And secondly, he says, as a prison house for those who enter from the kingdom below. So it's an interesting thing that each kingdom is a liberator for the kingdom below it. So that would, the kingdom below us is the animal kingdom. And he says that he makes a statement that the human kingdom will eventually be the savior of the animal kingdom. And it doesn't look that way to a lot of people right now, does it? What do you think about that? Melva, haven't picked on you for a while. Are you an animal lover?
I am.
Yeah. And yeah, we eat the animals. A lot of them are mistreated by commercial interests. So a lot of people think that we are in the way of animals. But what do you think? Are we making any progress toward treating the animals the way that we should?
Well,
Who else is going to save them?
Yeah,
I
go
believe
ahead.
I
Go
believe
ahead.
we are making progress.
Yeah. Yeah, we i- in any endeavor where you don't have full knowledge, you make a lot of mistakes, and we've made mistakes with animals, mistreated them, looked on them as uh, uncaring about their suffering. But I remember when I was a kid, I heard different adults say that animals don't really suffer the way we do, but you know uh, they do suffer, and so if we make them suffer, we are responsible. But we are making progress, in the fact that we're it's it's becoming in the consciousness of humanity that it's important to treat the animals with civility and uh, as little harm as possible. We're very concerned about them when we had to put them to sleep and so on. So we're treating our animals a little better all the time. We're gaining in consciousness, and what we need to do is we need to have faith in the ultimate good of humanity, that eventually we will treat the animals the way that we should. Now, let's fast forward maybe 1,000 years. How do you think we will be treating animals different then than we are today? Curtis, what do you think about that? How do you think we'll deal with animals different like 1,000 years from now?
Well, we probably won't be out shooting them as much as we are these days. I'll be able
Yeah.
to smell all my guns. I think
Yeah.
the way we've domesticated animals is a big step forward. I have 4 animals myself, and as far as the feeling nature, you never seen a little dog jump so high, so far, so fast, so often as he did when I came through that door after I was gone a week. So
Really? Yeah.
yeah,
He was really happy to see you, huh?
man, he jumped 5 feet just to lick my face, and he's just a little guy. So I think we're going to be more in touch with the intelligence of animals in the next 1,000 years, and we're going to see the value of animals just for what they are, and that they're really expressions of God. Tibetan calls them our little brothers, but they are divine expressions, and they do bring us a tremendous amount of joy. I would venture to say that 95% of everyone here has an animal of some kind.
Now you've had a dog just about all your life, haven't you? You've always had a pet.
Since I was a little kid, we had
I
a big.
remember one of the most upset times I've ever seen Curtis is when one of his dogs died. He just loved that dog.
Was that my little poodle?
No, that was that bigger dog that you had. That really expensive dog you paid a lot of money
Yeah,
for. What?
that was my black poodle. That was Tia,
All
and
right.
I had her for 3 years. She had got Addison's disease, and I spent a fortune trying to make her well. Couldn't do it. She died in my arms, and you just get really connected to your pets, and that's what they are. And so I think people are going to become more and more aware of the consciousness of animals, and they're going to be more and more kind. There was an animal that was shot with an arrow and hit the media, and people just rose up, and they were just appalled that someone could do such a low thing as shoot. I think it was shoot a cat with an arrow. So the consciousness towards animals, I think, is raising immensely, and in the next 1,000 years, it'll be more so. Whether it's a horse, a dog, cat, a bird, we're just going to be more connected.
I think one of the things that's going to be different in 1,000 years from now is the animals in the wild. And the animals in the wild, like they halfway starve to death in the middle of the winter, and they go through a lot of suffering, especially in wintertime. And I remember I went on a hayride a while back where we went and fed a bunch of elk. And if this farmer hadn't went and fed these elk, a lot of them would have starved to death. And, you know, think of us humans when we go without a meal for a day. We get pretty uncomfortable. Imagine the animals in the winter. And I think we will, that's one way we will save the animals is we'll make sure the wild animals are more taken care of during lean times, and so that they will have a more comfortable life. I think that is one direction that humanity will go to become a savior for the animals. The way I see it,
Yeah.
in eventually we'll eat a lot less animals. Right now we're making artificial meat that tastes a lot like regular. I bought a Beyond Burger patties a while back and cooked them up and made a hamburger out of them. I couldn't hardly taste the difference between a regular hamburger and that. It was pretty darn close, and we're going to get a lot closer. So we'll with the artificial meat science is producing, we will wind up slaughtering a lot fewer animals.
You know,
And
Joe,
I think
yeah,
I was going to say two things. One, the animals in the wild, I think, as the animosity between man and animal is diminished, the wild animals will become more tame. A lot of them are already becoming tame.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
they'll become more tame. There'll be much more interaction between the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. And also, to the credit of your cousin, oh, what's his name? His wife's name was Helen.
Don.
Don.
Oh,
Don, you talked about feeding the elk. About 5 or 6 years ago, we had a herd of antelope over in our area that were starving, and the Fish and Game Department wouldn't do anything to help them. And Don, to his credit, took a trailer load of hay out to these antelope and fed them, and basically single-handedly saved their lives.
really? Well, good for him.
And that was your cousin Don.
Yeah, I always liked Don. Don raised a bunch of greyhounds for racing. I used to go visit him, and man, he fed those greyhounds better than he fed his kids. He was very particular about what they ate because he raised them, and he made some pretty good money raising those greyhounds.
That's funny though that you mentioned the elk, and there he was saving the antelope.
Yeah, right. So
you know,
that's
Actually, JJ, I was going to say,
I
I've
think
actually
another-
witnessed the
okay,
change
Relina.
of, I watched 30 years ago, we moved in a really tiny town in southern Utah near the mountains, and there was deer that would come down, especially in the wintertime, and you would just see them usually early in the morning or at night, and they would run through the yards out into the fields and whatnot. But when we moved back here about 4 years ago, now they just intermingle all over within the town, day or night. They lay down in the yards under the trees. There's no fear anymore, and it's really interesting to see that change happening.
Yeah, they're here in Boise. They're seem to be not very afraid of us humans in the foothills when we meet them there, and so
yeah, JJ,
yeah,
I think also an unfoldment of this understanding about animals is coming about through people getting more in tune with this oneness theory, that they're spreading that, and that understanding out to include not just oneness with another individual, but we're oneness with everything. And they're starting to see that, and they're starting to be more conscientious about animals and their feelings. I think that has a lot to do with what's coming about, is this oneness theory that's people realize.
Yeah, we're becoming more sensitive all the time. Like just a few years ago, when you went to the store, an egg was an egg. Now you have cage-free eggs you can buy. If you're sensitive about chickens being treated well and given a little bit of space, you spend a little extra money and you buy cage-free eggs, which that I always buy the cage-free if I have a choice there. So, because I think back when I was a kid, I raised some chickens when I was a teenager, and I really enjoyed them. And I know that when they're out and about and able to go out and eat and roam around a little bit, that they are much happier and much more content than being in a cage. So, but on the negative side, I read that cage-free isn't as free as you think of it being. I'm not sure what all the parameters are, but the commercial people in raising chickens they have a challenge because they have to meet the supply, yet try to take good care of their chickens at the same time. So it's a really big challenge to meet the need that we have with the growing population all the time. Okay, he says, what happens when the lower kingdom enters the higher kingdom is there's still a prison because there's still matter involved, but we remove limitations from one area and we have new limitations, new challenges. So as we move up, and in the human kingdom itself, there's all kinds of different stages. When we began in the human kingdom, we were completely limited. We didn't even know there was any rules. We were just sought to survive. And then eventually we learn, hey, there are some rules. And then we learn to be governed by these rules. We learn to eliminate certain limitations. And when we do, we find out there's more. Eventually, when we become masters and we enter into the fifth kingdom, the kingdom above us, which is called the kingdom of God, we'll find there's still limitations to be removed. And even when you're one with the soul and enjoy the consciousness of what is called the causal body, which is the body of the soul, there's still limitations there, and the causal body eventually itself is destroyed, and then you're connected directly to the monad, and then there's still more limitations to remove after that. So we've got a lot of limitations to remove before we get completely back to our source. So it's going to be some time, but we never figured the journey would be easy. Now think of how long eternity is. We've been doing this for an eternity. So after an eternity is passed, so to speak, here we are. We've got probably a lot more mileage behind us than you can imagine, because eternity is quite a long time. So you can imagine, after going through many experiences in our history, we've designed something quite complicated to really challenge us in this existence that we're in. And I often ask people, well, what do you think? Is your life challenging enough, or do you want it more challenging? And how about you, Nick? Do you want your life more challenging, or you think you got enough for you to handle?
I can probably go a level higher.
Oh, really? Okay, well, you're one of the unusual. Maybe you're on a Sabbath life. You know, I'd say 1 out of every 7 lives is a little bit of Sabbath, but 6 out of 7 people have everything they can handle pretty much. So good for you, Nick. You're either on a Sabbath life, or else you just are kind of working your way through pretty successfully and able to tackle a little bit more. So good for you. Let's pick on somebody else. Now, Stacy, he's had a challenging life. Do you have? Are you wanting more, or you got? Have you got enough to handle, Stacy?
I don't think I could live if all my challenges stop. It's just an adventure one day after the next. You just got to keep climbing. It's just exciting.
Yeah. Now, Ed is always cool, calm, and collected. Do you have enough challenges, Ed, or do you want some more?
I think I need to do more.
Okay, I thought you might say that because you don't always go along with the flow.
I
Okay.
think that especially in a group like this, I think there's much more that I could add that I can't get a word in edgewise.
Yeah, we got plenty of people here today. So, what kind of challenge would you like in your life that you don't have right now?
I would like to take on an opportunity to teach what I have learned through many lives and things that are inside of me that are bubbling forth to get out.
Have you done any? Maybe you ought to start a blog and write a blog.
I think I do better on a one-to-one basis with people. That's why I go to the senior center and get conversations going on. And when I was in Plymouth, Massachusetts, I had a little group that we met at the senior center, and I led a discussion group, and I called it Life, the Universe, and Everything.
Yeah, the only trouble you have, and I know the feeling, is that it's really hard to find people that want the greater light. If you just have a Bible class or something like that, you could probably be pretty easy to gather some people around. But teaching the higher principles, it's a little bit more difficult to find a physical group where you can actually teach people. Have you found that to be the case, Ed?
Well, I found that whatever you're interested in, you attract into your life. And by faith, we don't need to worry and go shaking the trees to see what nuts fall out.
Well, at least you found old Curtis. He's not very far away from you.
Well, that's true. And I think I found your group first.
Yeah, and we aren't very far away here in Boise. So your energy follows thought here.
Well, I'll tell you, Ed introduces me to a pretty interesting bunch of people at the senior center. We had lunch.
Oh, really? You went to a senior center?
Can you believe it? I know
Really?
I'm barely a senior, but I still accompany them. And yeah, we had an interesting time, didn't we, Ed?
Well, it's always interesting and challenging to be able to say what you need to say in a way that is understandable.
Yeah.
But I think this open forum that we're creating on Tuesday night will give you a platform to express yourself. That's the whole purpose of it, is to bring enlightenment and ignorance together and see if we can make a blend and raise consciousness.
Yeah, you know, that's basically the Christ principle, is when you take a step forward and you learn some things, you have a natural desire to share it. And that's the order of things, is to you take a step forward, you lend a hand behind you to the guy struggling, and you help him or her, of course. And so it's a natural thing, and a lot of people have some frustration because they have difficulty in finding people that really want to learn. But there are people out there, and when you find them, well, then that's really great. I remember when I started gathering a lot of light and knowledge when I was in the Mormon church. I couldn't find anybody to share it with. And if I did share it, I was in danger of being thrown out of the church if the authorities found out. So I had to be very cautious. So I had these key questions I asked different people, and One of them was a Mormon mystery, like where are the 10 tribes? And I didn't find anybody that answered the question right until Curtis moved to town. My ne'er-do-well nephew, as I thought of him at the time.
That's funny, Joe.
And I asked him a couple of these key questions about mysteries, and he was really enthused about knowing about him. I thought, wow, my own nephew, I underestimated the guy. And so anyway, Curtis, it was really great to find somebody to share with. And this is it's so I would encourage everyone, keep an eye out for people you can share your knowledge with. Everybody here has quite a bit more knowledge than the average guy out there. And I'm sure everybody in the group wants to share with somebody else. And so keep that in mind. Keep in mind how you can share, and always be on the lookout, because you never know. Like with Curtis, he was my nephew. I knew him from the day he was born, but I didn't have a clue that he was a potential person to share higher knowledge with until I asked him a couple key questions, and he answered correctly.
Well, you
And so
never
you
know.
just never know.
You never know. Well,
Yeah.
this principle of give and receive, you've been given knowledge and light, and then, yeah, you fill yourself up, your cup runneth over, you're looking for someone, another vessel to pour it into, and that creates a vacuum for more new stuff to come in. So it's an eternal flow, ebb and flow, I think.
Yeah. Now, DK says this: let it be remembered always that each field of awareness in its boundaries constitutes a prison, and that the objective of all work of liberation is to release the consciousness and expand its field of context. Okay, we all want to expand our field of context. Where there are boundaries of any kind, where a field of influence is circumscribed, and where the radius of contact is limited, there you have a prison. And where we have worlds to conquer or steps in evolution, we have limitation and a prison from which we escape. So when we take our step forward and then we turn around and help our brother, we're really helping him with an escape plan, so to speak. So you watch all these shows. There's all kinds of shows about escape from prison, like The Great Escape, with Steve McQueen in, or Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood. They all the prisoners get together and they hatch a plan as to how they're going to escape. And so we're in this prison, and we are working together to hatch a plan as to how to escape from all the limitations that we find ourselves in. He says we evolve from instinct to intellect to intuition to illumination. Okay, the instinct is like very closely associated with the animal kingdoms. Animals have a great instinct for survival, and primitive man had this instinct. And then he eventually developed mind. And then mind overruled the instinct, and the instinct went below the threshold of consciousness, as DK calls it. We have in us, below the threshold of consciousness, a lot of knowledge and abilities that can be retrieved. He says when something goes below the threshold of consciousness, like say the survival instinct that animals have that maybe we don't have anymore, he says they can always be retrieved if we need to retrieve them. They're still there. We have all kinds of kind of what people would think of as psychic abilities that or go below the threshold of consciousness. Now, why do they go the threshold of consciousness? It's because it allows your consciousness then to focus on something else. Because if you've got too many things in your consciousness, you're too scattered and you don't develop any of them. So what happens when we develop a certain ability to perfection, like our instincts? Then they go below the threshold of consciousness, so they don't compete for our consciousness anymore. They're there if we need them, but this frees us up so we can focus then on developing mind, common sense, good judgment. And so for many lifetimes then we focus on developing this mind. And then the next step is up to the intuition. The intuition is where you reach a dead end with your mind. And so the mind itself doesn't give you the solutions. So then you reflect. You start reflecting, and from a higher source, starting with a still small voice to the voice of many waters, as it's described in the scriptures. So we go from the still small voice to the voice of many waters. And in other words, it begins very small, and eventually the communication is solid enough that you can't mistake it. And so we develop this intuition. And to use intuition, you put a lot of focus on a certain thought or idea, and you make a contact with the soul, and you bring the knowledge down to earth. But then above that, he says, is illumination. How is illumination different from the intuition? Anybody got an idea on that?
I think you become the light. You are the thing itself.
Right. In other words, the seeker and the sought are one, you discover. And so you become one with the soul. So instead of when the person achieves what is called illumination, he has a knowing about him about things. So he doesn't have to think long and hard about what he wants to know. If he just directs his mind in that direction, he will have a knowing, and that is the illumination. Now the masters would be in that quality of being individuals that have achieved illumination. If you were to ask a master a question, he would instantly have a knowing about the answer. And even
They've arrived.
What's say?
They've arrived.
Right. Concerning illumination, he says, what does that lead to? Straight to the summit of achievement, to the fulfillment of cyclic destiny, to the emergence of radiant glory, to wisdom, power, God consciousness. These words, however, mean little or nothing in comparison with the reality which can only be sensed by any human being when his intuition is awakened and his mind illuminated. Okay, so says for average people, speaking of illumination doesn't have much meaning. They can't really grasp it, but we got to focus on it, and eventually we will come to having a greater understanding. So the next question is, it looks like we're nearing the end of our time here, but I'll throw out the next question for contemplation for next week. How can a person become a releasing agent for the prisoners of the planet? He says there are 3 groups of prisoners that can be released by humans. 1, other humans. 2, prisoners within the animal kingdom. We talked about that quite a bit already. And 3, prisoners within the forms of the vegetable world. And he says a beginning has been made there. And he doesn't speak of the minerals because have not been agents to release the prisoners of the planet in the mineral kingdom at that time. That was written in 1934. But in 1945, we did become agents of releasing the prisoners of the planet in the mineral kingdom. Does anyone know what happened to cause that?
Yeah, atomic energy.
Right.
The atom bomb.
Right. The atom bomb, he says, was an initiation for the mineral kingdom, and it actually released the life of the in the uranium atoms. When they split in two, he says a portion of the spiritual life was released from its prison, which was very interesting. So we did have an effect on the mineral kingdom about 11 or 12 years, a dozen years after he wrote this, which is pretty interesting. Let's just hope we don't have to eventually blow ourselves up to release all the minerals. He says every element can achieve radioactivity. So there's other ways besides atomic bombs to release the prisoners of the planet in the mineral kingdom. So anyway, keep those thoughts in mind as we proceed on to next week, and we will meet again next Sunday at 2 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time. Any comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Well, just that spirit and matter are always coexisting in every dimension. There is always spirit and matter coexisting.
Right. That's certainly true. And it has to coexist to give us the experience that we want. Because
it's part of the Trinity, and the Trinity is one.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments?
I have a point. If you're trying to increase the radius of your contacts, your influence, and bringing light, you want to save 144,000 people. You don't have to go out and meet every one of them people. All you need is 2 or 3 friends to get the point. You teach them, and it spreads out.
Yeah, it's like these multi-level marketing. You get 1 or 2 really good people, they get a bunch of people, and the people under them get a bunch of people. And if you're successful, you have a big downline. So each of us, hopefully each of us can create a big downline of people that we influence for good. Okay, any other comments before we wrap it up?
Good meeting.
Okay, don't forget at several more hours, so the exact moment of the full moon, you might take about a few minutes and have a personal meditation. So we will, and think of the key word here is balance, balancing the 2 oppositions. And we talked here about spirit and matter. Balancing ourselves between those 2 is always a challenge. Okay, we're signing off. Good to see you. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great week. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Love everybody.